And now I'm glad to introduce today's speaker, Alva Noé. Professor Noé is a philosopher of art and perception who over about 20 years and many books has been engaged in a project of theorizing the encounter between the human being and the work of art, whether painting, dance, or literature, and at the same time developing an account of consciousness that refuses to cede the big questions to science alone. In his most recent book, The Entanglement: How Art and Philosophy Make Us What We Are, published in 2023, he argues that we should understand the relation between life and art as deeply mutual, not only that art is made of life, truism, but that life is made of art, and even life is art, or as he eloquently puts it, quote, because human nature is the stuff of art, it is really a misnomer to speak of human nature at all. We are questions, not answers. And in this, we are like artworks. To understand and know ourselves, we need to undertake an aesthetic investigation of that work in progress that is the self we are. And he goes on, it is no part of my purpose to say no to science or even to a science of the human. My aim, rather, is to say yes to art and to the importance of the aesthetic attitude that art sustains. Professor Noé is the author of a number of books, starting from the earlier ones, Action in Perception, 2004, Out of Our Heads, Why You Are Not Your Brain and Other Lessons from the Biology of Consciousness, 2009, Varieties of Presence, 2012, Strange Tools, Art and Human Nature, 2015, Infinite Baseball, this one's the outlier, Infinite Baseball, Notes from a Philosopher at the Ballpark, 2019, Learning to Look, Dispatches from the Art World, 2022, and of course, the book I just quoted, The Entanglement. He's currently writing about love, AI, and theories of pictoriality. Alva Noé is professor of philosophy and chair of the Department of Philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley, where he is also a member of the Center for New Media, the Institute for Cognitive and Brain Sciences, and the Program in Critical Theory. A former Guggenheim Fellow, he is, until the end of 2026, an Einstein Visiting Fellow at the Free University of Berlin. Let's give a warm welcome to someone who may not have traveled far, but who nonetheless honors us with his presence, Alva Noé.
Good afternoon. Greetings to all of you. Welcome. Thank you for being here, both those of you who are in this auditorium and those who are online. Thank you for your presence and your participation. Thanks also to Professor Roland Green, the director of this beautiful center, and also to the president of Stanford University for inviting me to deliver what is the presidential lecture in the humanities and arts here at Stanford. My topic is love and consciousness. I have a subtitle for the occasion, Life's Work, an Endless Task. I also came up with an epigram for the occasion. There's some lines of verse from the poet Delmore Schwartz that I read. This sort of sounds like a humble brag, but I actually read this when I was a teenager, and it's just stuck with me all this time. And it keeps coming back to me as I work on the ideas that I'm sharing with you today. So the lines go like this. I no more wrote than read that book, which is the self I am, half hidden as it is from one and all who see within a kiss the lounging, formless blackness of an abyss. How could I have thought the brief years were enough to prove the reality of endless love? Now, on the face of it, love and consciousness are wildly different things. Love is relationship, it's social, it is attachment, it is passionate. Consciousness, in contrast, we might think, is private, relentlessly individual. It is the product of the action of the brain inside us. Whereas love is a fundamental expression of value, consciousness is more like digestion or metabolism. It's fed by impulses from without, but it happens within and is screened off from whatever there is beyond its limits. But what if that's the wrong way to think about consciousness? Indeed, what if the assumption that consciousness is divorced from value, from sociality, and from the striving for intimacy is precisely what gets in the way of anything that deserves to be thought of as progress in this area? What if consciousness isn't something value-free and, as it were, organic, but is rather accomplished in our activity as human animals, in our action towards intimacy and knowing, and in our labor to enter into and sustain relationships with people and with situations and with places? What if consciousness, like love, is the work of making relationships? This is the thesis I wish to explore with you today. The idea that there would be nothing there for us, and we would not be if not for love. That love names the work of opening up the world the very labor of consciousness. That love is the setting for our becoming. As Jonathan Lear puts it in a 1990 book that I admire, the world exists because we love it. Now, this is not meant to be a mystical or religious thesis. It would come closer to the mark, at least to my aspiration, to say that it should be a biological one. What I'm after is this: it is life's work to enter into and bring forth the world. Love is life's work. Now, students and teachers of philosophy, and I hope that there are a few of you here in the room, know that the philosophy curriculum is sharply divided these days, actually for hundreds of years, along the contested boundary between fact and value. Value courses cover moral philosophy and social and political philosophy and aesthetics, if it's taught. M&E courses, where M&E means metaphysics and epistemology, target questions about knowledge, the basic structure of reality, and the place of the human in the wider universe. If you want to study love, you take a value course. If you want to study perception, mind, or consciousness, you take a course in M&E. If I'm right, if the idea that I'm going to try to work out with you today is along the right lines, this way of organizing the curriculum should be a source of embarrassment. Love and value are the very heart of the problems of perception, consciousness, and indeed life. Now, before I get started, just a brief comment about my method in philosophy. I used the word progress just now. Scientists and other practical people sometimes delight in noticing that philosophy does not make progress. Sniggers in the audience. In philosophy, nothing is proved, nothing is settled once and for all, there are no theorems, and this is right. Philosophy moves forward, but it tends in a circle, ending up eventually and again where it started, retracing where it has been before. But I ask you, is there a way of thinking of progress such that philosophy so conceived can be said to make progress? An old proverb supplies a clue. I'm unable to advance the slide for some reason. Figured out a way to do it. If you want to see something new, walk the same path every day. I understand the idea here like this. There's a kind of discovery and learning that happens not in the encounter with something novel, but in the disclosure of aspects, depths of what you already know, layers of what you already know, not in the acquisition of something unfamiliar, but in a better, truer comprehension of what is there for you. So I think of philosophy as aiming at this sort of disclosure. Philosophy does not seek to contribute to the archives, as it were, by adding to the stockpile of truths. Philosophy's work is that of getting us to enter into and sustain our relationship with what is there and where we are. Philosophy targets presence. And in this, it is precisely a discipline, that is to say, a practice of love and consciousness. Thought of this way, philosophy enacts the very love work of consciousness that is my topic. It should come as no surprise. The word philosophy, after all, contains the words love and knowing right inside of it. Now, to a surprising degree, thought about love tends to organize itself around two poles. On the one side, there's what I'll call the peaches and cream conception, according to which love is natural and normal, and it is good because it is natural and normal. Like strong teeth and healthy bones, the capacity for love belongs to normal human life. Having love in your life, on this view, is something like a medical accomplishment rather than a personal one. It's like having good genes. Normal kids love their parents and parents their children at some stage as a matter of development. The circle of attachment widens to include not only friends, but sexual and romantic interests. The class of the lovable swells to include, in addition to other people, God, country, callings, and hobbies, and much else besides. Life without love, according to the peaches and cream conception, is an impoverished life, but it's impoverished in the way a life without good health is impoverished. Love is its own species of health or wealth or value, so that even if your material circumstances are miserable, if you've got love, there's a sense in which you have what matters. Love is a basic and unconditional good on this view. And when love is not good, if you love someone who mistreats you, or if you mistreat someone you love, or if you love a would-be authoritarian dictator, then you don't really love at all. You are basically sick. It is your trauma or your history or your family stuff that gets in the way of the natural impulse to love, to be connected, to be intimate, to trust. Now, there is a darker conception that forms the other pole of our thinking about love. Love is hard. It may be dangerous. It may be terrible. Loving relationships, even when they are valuable and successful, are fragile and fraught, and no matter how secure, and no matter how much they offer satisfaction and pleasure and joy, they're also at least intermittently unsettled and changing and also challenging. This is true of romantic love, which fails as often as it succeeds, and which, when it succeeds, and for however long it succeeds, is still often a place of strife and disunion, in order that it is also sometimes a place of joy and safety and union. But I think this is true of all our relationships, for example, with children, parents, siblings, God, country, vocation. Crucially, in contrast with peaches and cream, you don't get love just for the price of admission on the darker conception. You need to achieve love, and it isn't easy, it isn't guaranteed, it's a prize, it's an accomplishment, it's a risk, rather than, as it were, our birthright, something like a natural developmental expression. This is related to another feature of love, namely its ambivalence. Eros is bittersweet, to use Sappho's word as translated by Anne Carson. Love is always an encounter with what one wants, but does not yet have. Like hunger, love is fed by longing and need. It vanishes upon fulfillment. And so love always flirts with fantasy. It is an imaginative orientation, to presence that is always also absence. If the peaches and cream conception sets love against the background of our nature and what's good for us, a picture of health, the darker conception views love against the background of the ethical challenges we face in becoming who we are or should be. There's a novel by Sheila Heti, whose title captures, I think, love's basic challenge according to the darker conception. The title is, How Should a Person Be? If you were to epitomize the peaches and cream conception in a slogan, you probably couldn't do better than something by Lennon and McCartney. Now, I'm partial to the darker conception, but I appreciate that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Love may be hard and ethically fraught, but it does seem in some sense to be natural to us. You may not get love for the price of admission, but you do get the problem of love for free. Love is a natural born concern. You can find some clues to how to move forward in two authors I found particularly instructive in this vicinity. The first is Bell Hooks, whose 2004 book on love is now a bestseller. For Hooks, love is not a feeling or an attitude, it's a kind of activism. To love a person is to be dedicated to their flourishing, but also dedicated to one's own flourishing through one's dedication to their flourishing. Now, when I read Hooks, I worry that there's something potentially peaches and cream about the idea that love is always good and mutually beneficial in this way. It strikes me that neither Abraham's love for God nor his love for Isaac was a matter of mutual benefit. I think that's the only reference to religion in the talk. And it's only by ignoring the many cases in which love is misplaced, trust broken, or in which love requires great sacrifice or goes unrequited, that we can think of love as always mutual and always good. But there is a registration of love's darker side, I think, in Hooks's appreciation that love aims at good works, that love is to be committed to a project of caring. This idea that love is work finds its finest articulation in the second text I'd like to mention, namely philosopher Gillian Rose's 1995 memoir with the excellent title, Love's Work. Rose was born in a family that had been almost entirely wiped out in the Holocaust. She herself was raised in a household riven by divorce. She came into her own as a woman at the height of AIDS, and she experienced love, but a great deal of death in her personal community. And then she herself was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. The memoir is written as she pursues medical treatment. The reader knows, as Rose herself cannot know, that she doesn't make it. So it's a gruesome and enraging book. It's shocking and hard to read, but it also contains a brief and forcible statement about love. Having reached the limits of what academic medicine can offer her, Rose is drawn to look to healthcare from alternative sources. And here she encounters teachers who present themselves, in her words, as post-Judaic New Age Buddhists, who peddle the idea, as she puts it, that you can survive and live, quote, only if you dissolve the difficulty of living, of love, of self and other, of the other in the self, if you are translucid without inner or outer boundaries. To this, Rose says no. And she writes, and I'm going to now quote her in full. Exceptional, edgeless love of the kind recommended by the New Age Buddhists effaces the risk of relation, that mix of exposure and reserve, of revelation and reticence. It commands the complete unveiling of the eyes, the transparency of the body. Existence is robbed of its weight, its gravity, when it is deprived of its agon. Instead of insinuating that illness may better prepare you for the earthly impossibilities, these enchiridions on faith, hope, and love would condemn you to seek blissful, deathless, cosmic emptiness, the repose without the revel. Continues, I reach for my whiskey bottle and instruct my valetudinarian well-wishers to imbibe the shark's oil and aloe vera themselves. If I am to stay alive, I am bound to get love wrong all the time, but not to cease wooing, for that is my life affair, love's work. Now, love's work, according to Rose, does not consist in the achievement of union with another, an edgeless or boundary-free merger. This is a common idea, maybe even an attractive one, in the theory of love, that just as a man and woman give birth to a child, so two people in love give birth to a third thing, the couple, or maybe the marriage or the relationship. And this new entity is a new being brought into existence. For Rose, it's not the delivery that matters, it's the labor. She writes that conditionality is the only unconditionality of human love. She says also that it's really not the consummation, but the striving after love that is what matters. And so again, just to repeat those final words, if I am to stay alive, I'm bound to continue to get love wrong all the time, but not to cease wooing, for that is my life. Now, some philosophers exploring the nature of love take presence, the presence of the beloved, or your knowledge of or acquaintance with the beloved, for granted. Love for Harry Frankfurt, for example, is disinterested concern for the existence of what is loved and for what is good for it. David Velleman discusses love as an arresting awareness, one that confronts us with the sheer presence of the other, and thus tends to counteract our tendency to be protective or closed off. Views such as these, as I read them, take for granted that the other is there for you, in-focused, stable, a definite thing, and that love is a felt response to the real presence of the other. But this gets things backwards. If only we could take for granted who, what, how the other is. But our grip on others is always fragile, in progress, and uncertain. Love's problem is not whether we like what we see or whether we are arrested by it or moved by it or drawn to it, made to care about it, or whether we value it. Love's problem is seeing in the first place. It is this antecedent task of bringing the other into focus and accomplishing their presence and our own that is love's challenge. We don't love because the ones we love are so impressive or so charming or so beautiful or good. There isn't really any fully formed person there for you prior to the unfolding of your relationship with them. You bring them and their qualities into view. You enact them in the work of coming to know them. Love is the commitment to this work. So here then is my proposal that I'm going to try to work out in what follows. Love is something we do or undertake. It's work, as Rose and Hooks suggest. But what kind of work? And what is the value of this work if it is valuable even when it fails? My answer: to love someone or something is to strive to accomplish their presence and also one's own presence with them. This characterization, I emphasize, brings out the immediate link to consciousness. For the problem of consciousness, as I take it, is precisely that of understanding how we accomplish the world's presence in thought, in experience. Crucially, the task of achieving presence is a job that needs doing. So love is hard, I invite you to consider, because it is a kind of problem for perceptual consciousness, and because genuine perception, real seeing, actual intimacy or knowledge is hard. It is, in fact, in Iris Murdoch's phrase, an endless task. But to make a start at understanding these various claims, let's turn our attention to what might at first glance seem to be a separate matter or a mere analogy, the case of aesthetic perception. Here we confront, I think, a strikingly similar shape of problem. You might have thought that the aim of aesthetics is to evaluate or judge works of art with respect to whether they are, for example, beautiful or original or meaningful or important or attractive, whether you like them. Just as we suppose that when it comes to love, our aim is to assess the lovability of those to whom we might dedicate ourselves. But in fact, as with love, at least as I'm urging us to think about it, so with the work of aesthetics, the real work comes before all that. It's the work of achieving the object and oneself. It's the work of making a relationship with it, in this case, with an art object. So consider, it's possible to go to a gallery, for example, and pass through without experiencing the art. This is a theme in the writing of John Dewey. You see the work in a purely optical sense. You make a neural scan, as it were, but you don't engage it, and in a way you don't get it. There is a fuller perception of the work, a way of getting it or entering into relationship with it that you don't enjoy just for the price of admission to the gallery. To know the artwork requires a further kind of engagement, and that will consist not merely in opening the eyes, but in paying attention, in talking, in questioning, in investing oneself. Aesthetic engagement is, I offer, the work that lets you move from not seeing to seeing, or from seeing to seeing differently, or from seeing to really seeing. What changes when you do that work? What changes when you pass from not seeing the painting that's right there in front of you to actually seeing it? What happens when you do the aesthetic work that lets you move from not seeing to seeing, or from seeing to seeing differently? It's not the painting that changes, it's you who change. But in changing yourself, you manage to bring the painting into focus, to enter into relationship with it, to come to know it. So in changing yourself, you change what is there for you. You change your world by changing your subjectivity. This is what aesthetic engagement accomplishes. You enact yourself and bring forth the world. This is a remarkable phenomenon. This work of coming into relationship with the artwork is the achievement or accomplishment of both you and the artwork. There's a sense in which you become the creator. Now, here it is absolutely crucial for appreciating what I'm getting at, that we allow that this sort of aesthetic work that I'm describing, creative and productive and disclosing, is in no way confined to art. Art is valuable, if it's valuable, when it is valuable, because it gives us opportunities to do aesthetic work, or to catch ourselves in the act of doing this work, namely the work of bringing the world into focus, the work of entering into relationship with what is there. And the aesthetic predicament, the confrontation with what we cannot see, even though it's well lit right there in front of us and unoccluded, is ubiquitous in our perceptual lives. We typically don't pay attention to all the complicated negotiations we undertake, all the peering and squinting and shifting and attention reorienting, so that we can succeed in seeing, so that we can succeed in bringing the world into focus and keeping it there. We sometimes do not experience perception as requiring any particular effort on our part because we rely on skills, habits, context, and pre-understandings, and we seem effortlessly to put these to work in achieving the world around us. Fluent reading is an example. If there's writing, you read it. This can feel effortless and automatic, even when it is, of course, the upshot of tremendous preparation and training. But not always. Sometimes we come up against the limits of what we can spontaneously recognize or know. Sometimes our habits, skills, and understandings fail to equip us to cope with what there is. If I don't know the language, for example, I'm unable even to perceive the words. In a case such as that, the world may show up as not quite perceptible or unintelligible or as illegible, and we may experience ourselves as unable to perceive it. Or consider, we come up, I think, often against this sort of aesthetic predicament when we encounter the strange in the setting of race or sex or politics. We are sometimes confronted with people we are unable or unwilling to perceive, know. In such a case, we need to reorganize ourselves ethically, sexually, politically, but also maybe even conceptually, just to let what there is before us be there for us. In these cases, we need to do work, and I think the work is the aesthetic work of perceiving what there is, and this work is not easy. So there is no mere analogy on this view between the aesthetic work of perceptual consciousness and that of love. Love is precisely, so this is my bid, a dedication to the aesthetic work of finding ways to see what is there, to engage a person or a situation honestly and with concern. And some of you who know will recognize I'm implicitly referring to Iris Murdoch. It's the work, this aesthetic work, is the work, or love, is the work of growing and changing so that one might enter into relationship with others and the world around you. It's the work of making relationships so that one might grow and change. Just as we remake ourselves and the world in our serious engagement with art, this is what we do when we enter into relationship with another. And this now lets us begin to appreciate how this work of love is valuable, even when we fail, truly, stably, or finally, to accomplish intimacy with the other, even when the relationships we strive to build don't hold. This work of love and consciousness is the very work of being, becoming, and enacting a world. This is being alive. This is life's work. Love's value is life's value. Now, I'd like to turn to an example that will surprise some of you, maybe, the case of vocational love. This will let us deepen our sense of the ideas that are at play here. Suppose that you are a surfer. Let's imagine that this is your calling. Let us grant that you love surfing. You're a very lucky person. Not everybody gets to have a calling, let alone answer that calling. And even among those who live near enough to the sea to surf, it's only a relatively small number that get to devote themselves to surfing. But suppose that you are one of these. Now consider, you may have chosen to spend your time surfing, but you didn't choose for surfing to be your calling. You didn't choose to love surfing, or rather, if you did, it's not because you came to know surfing and appreciate its qualities. You never found yourself in a position to make the judgment that all things considered, it's surfing's qualities that you prefer over, say, the qualities of a life in baseball or the law or music. And one reason why this is so is that you cannot really know what surfing offers, what the life of a surfer is like, or what surfing's qualities are before you enter into the work of surfing. Actually, since surfing is something that changes for you as you learn how to surf, as your competences enhance and your ambitions develop, there's a sense in which there is literally nothing there for you to know prior you're entering into the life of surfing. You yourself, through your hard work and dedication, bring forth what surfing is and can be for you. You enact for yourself the reality of surfing. The limits of the surfing world for you are your personal limits. The surfing world exists for you, to reuse this language, there because you love it. But there's a second related consideration. As you do the work of getting to know surfing, you change. You acquire new skills, new dispositions. Even as you develop sunburn and calluses, you acquire new curiosities, ambitions, and aspirations. As the shape of the possibilities warp and expand, so you become the person you are in and through your active life as a surfer. Your identity is shaped through your surfing. So to love surfing then is to enter into a relationship with surfing. It's to dedicate yourself to the work and of being and becoming a surfer, which is to say, it's to dedicate yourself to the work of making surfing. Love transforms you, your love of surfing, your dedication, and it transforms surfing. So let us view this form of vocational love as our very paradigm of how love works, whether adult sexual love or parental love or whatever. I become what I am through the work of coming to know the other. But in coming to know you, for example, I don't merely discover your antecedently existing qualities. With you, I bring these lovable qualities forth. Love is the productive labor whereby we make each other. So to help make this vivid, recall to mind someone you are close to, a friend you've known for years and years. Now think back to your first encounter. What did you see? What could you know then? So really do this. When I think back to such a first meeting, I'm struck not only at how different my friend is now from what he was like then, I'm struck that in memory, at least, my friend shows up as somehow indistinct, interesting maybe, or attractive, or maybe suggestive or amusing or somehow enticing. That is to say, as an affordance or solicitation for more, but for more that was at the time without body and shape. He was not then for me what he would become for me. And so he did not yet exhibit the aspects and qualities that would retroactively, as it were, justify the attachment I have to him. It's not my love that brings his qualities into view, as if the love were a vantage point. What he is for me is something that only exists in the setting of the relationship. I change him with my love. I make him with my love. Now I turn to an objection. It might seem as if what I have proposed confines the work of love to the head of the lover, making it entirely the work of the lover's individual subjectivity. But then love might start to feel like a one-sided projection or fantasy, and we lose a grip on love as a genuine relationship with and knowledge of an independent reality. Now, in fact, I actually think it's important to admit that love sources in our subjectivity, that love is not only creative, as we've been considering, but that there's a sense in which it's unconstrained by the way things are, and that it enjoys a certain kind of autonomy. To illustrate what I have in mind, consider an example. You might criticize me for not being afraid of opioid painkillers that the doctor has prescribed to me after an accident, because after all, whether I acknowledge it or not, the drugs pose a real danger, for example, the threat of addiction. I ought to be afraid. I ought to have at least some measure of fear or concern. But you can't in the same way criticize me for not loving surfing, no matter how wonderful surfing really is. You can remind me how fun it is to surf, how challenging and thrilling. You can strive to convince me that I would be happier as a surfer, but you can't, as it were, prove to me that I should be a surfer. Either I give myself over to surfing or I don't. Either surfing calls me or it doesn't. And when it does, this says as much about me as it does about surfing, or probably more. What's at stake here is who I am, not what surfing's like. And I think this brings out the ways in which love, for all that is an activity, for all that it is project, for all that it is work, is sourced by itself in feeling. And the same goes, I believe, for love of a person or appreciation of an artwork. There's no place here, as Kant might have reminded us, for rule or deduction. No listing of a person's attractive features can add up to a motive for me to love that person. Who they are in that sense, what their features or qualities are, don't really matter. And this captures the truth in the idea that love is grounded in the feelings of the lover. Love is not authorized by the beloved, but nor is it entirely under the lover's own control. It's as if, and this is language that Edmund Husserl uses, it's as if love sources deep in the lover's egoic depths. And yet, I think it would be a big mistake to take any of this to show that we are confined within our own subjectivity when we love, or that love is not, in fact, entering into, or at least the undertaking of the work of entering into, relationship with a really existing other. For one thing, it's the general fact of the reality of the other, the challenge of bringing them into focus, their resistance to being seen, that gives rise to the problem, to the need to know them in the first place. The aesthetic predicament arises because we're motivated to cope with what confronts us, with where we happen to be. Here, I think it's important background that it is only in a fairly superficial sense that we choose the situations that confront us. But remember also, crucially, I am not fixed. I am not a judge at a desk. I myself am born, each of us is born in the work of coping with, to stick with my example, surfing. And although this coping may be personal, interested, motivated, it's not therefore projection or confabulation. I am at the mercy of the waves and the larger surfing world. Even if it's true that I make myself and the surfing world in my relationship with surfing, it's also true that surfing shows up for me as an independently existing reality that I must cope with or come to work to. And as with my vocational love partner, so also with my personal love partner. She is no less a reality than the waves that crash over me. And yet, through the activity of achieving her presence, it is I who first bring her forth for me, who make her there for me. We become what we are in relationship. Love brings us forth. Love brings us forth, really. Which is not to deny, and I think this is a critical concession, that we are sometimes, or maybe even to some degree anyway, often or even always caught up in blinds of fantasy, confabulation, projection. Sometimes our passion does cut us off from the reality we strive to be connected to. We are products of our own histories, always acting under the influence of yesterday's traumas and yesterday's needs. But crucially, this risk, this liability that we might be fantasizing, is one of love's characteristic features. Love is always a problem to itself. Love's fragile entanglement is the lover's burden. Whether I really love her or my fantasy of her, whether I really love surfing, that is, whether I am a surfer really, and not just a pretender, these are love's uneasy and unavoidable questions. Love is always shaped by these anxieties about love, with which it is entangled. Now, one problem, philosophers like to present views, but they also like to consider what's wrong with the views. So I'm giving you ammunition. One problem for the later discussion, I mean, one problem with the story of love that I'm developing here, so you might think, is that it fails to give pride of place to people. It's one thing to love surfing or a work of art or your stamp collection, and it's another to love your child or a friend. Other people are not objects, nor are they merely objects of perception. Others are real existences with minds of their own. They look back, they say no, or maybe they say yes, and collaborate with you with this consensual project of entering into relationship. My view, one might worry, flattens out love, treating it in effect as mere knowing, mere perceiving, and with what might seem like the additional flabbergasting consequence that all perceiving is somehow loving, as if to see a thing were always, in a way, to love it. Flabbergasting maybe, but I encourage you to welcome this upshot. I do not deny, and nothing in the view requires me to deny, that you can both see a thing and despise it or hate it. But this is because, crucially, and this requires more discussion to really motivate, neither hate nor despisement are love's opposite. Love's opposite is indifference. And indifference, as manifest in our lives, for example, when we are depressed, but also in a certain kind of slackness or laziness or distraction and habit, to use language that Dewey uses. Indifference is the basic condition of blindness. So I come back to what has really been my theme all along. As with the work of art and love, so with perceptual appreciation of the world around us generally, the real work, the true task, is that of bringing what is there into focus so that we may know it. That is love's work. Only it were the case that vision was easy, and the world simply there, fixed and certain, to use the image again, just for the price of admission. Such a conception of consciousness, I think, is no more tenable than the corresponding peaches and cream conception of love. Just as love is hard, so vision is hard. We walk about very often as in a fog. Our presence and that of the world around us is fragile and is itself always a work in progress. What do you experience now, really? Pause and put this question to yourself. What is there for you here? What makes it so challenging to give an answer to this, and I think it is challenging, is not that words fail us, but that they overwhelm us. There are too many words, too much that one can or might say. But there's a further fact, which is that the very effort of finding the words, of trying to put what is there for us into words, produces new experience, new relationship. Experience is not fixed and indeterminate. Excuse me, it's not fixed and determinate. Like all our relationships, experience, your experience now, is labile, unruly, becoming. Merleau-Ponty, the great French phenomenologist, we have an expert or two in the room, put it like this: nothing is more difficult than knowing precisely what we see. And yet, it is vital that we understand this. We are called upon to try to know, to appreciate what is there for us, And indeed, in part at least, because the effort itself is productive, that is to say, creative of new experience and new relationship. Which brings us back to the proverb with which I began. If you want to see something new, walk the same path every day. But now we can imagine that the proverb continues. But this time, as you return to the path, pay attention. Rouse yourself from your indifferent slumbers. Do the work of letting what is there show up for you. Make relationship. Live. Be. Lear had written that the world is there because we love it. So let's go farther and endorse the flabbergasting upshot. We know only what we love, for knowing is love's very work. Or to borrow words from the brilliant philosopher and cognitive scientist, Hannah de Jager, in their most stripped down form, this is a quotation, loving and knowing are manifestations of the same basic existential way of relating. Now, far from it being the case that the view I'm exploring with you today is indifferent to the special standing of the person as love object, I actually think it supplies us resources the better to make sense of that. Love, as I'm framing it here, is the work of making relationships, work which is both self-achieving and world-achieving. Moreover, I've indicated, this is life's work. But human life, our life as the kinds of mammals that we are, begins literally in the body and then in the arms and then at the bosom of other people. It is the embrace of the other that is the safe setting in which we get to take on the work of love. In effect, it's being loved, or at least being cared for, that makes our loving and so living possible for us. Without that, there could be no life, not just because we would die of neglect as a plant would die if it was not watered, but because a certain good fortune, namely safety, stability, regularity, and support, are required for it to be possible for there to be any reaching out, pulling back, turning towards, and saying yes, that is to say, any accomplishment of self and world at all. That's why Freud was able to write that living means being loved. And yet, it's important for my presentation today that we must not misunderstand nor overstate the special importance of the person as love object. I've been trying to persuade you that what Husserl called love values are implicit in all relationships, not only in our interpersonal ones. You need a loving gaze, really, to know anything at all, let alone the person you're with. It's only sometimes the case that the things we love are in a position to love us back. Here, the point is to appreciate not only that all relationships are hard, but that all relationships, including those with vocations or with mere things, are fragile and entangled and productive. Indeed, they are transformative in the ways that our relationships with people are. Now, there's a lot that one could say that I won't try to do here, taxonomizing different kinds of love. What I've been trying to do is offer a more general, foundational, existential account according to which love in all its varieties is the always unfinished and so endless task of entering into relationship with that which is like an artwork, precisely not yet seen, not yet comprehended, not yet even really there. This aesthetic work of love is consciousness. Now, I just have a few more very brief words before I conclude. Itchy, I will relieve you in just a moment. So much has been written about love, but perhaps nothing so strange, at least to some contemporary ways of thinking, as the biblical commandment that we love. I said I wasn't going to talk about religion, but I'm coming back to it. That we love God and that we love our neighbors as we love ourselves. If you think of love as an attitude or sort of an appraisal of a pre-given object, then this commandment doesn't really make sense. How can one obey in order to feel or care or approve? But if you think of love as the hard work of paying attention in the service of the accomplishment of a world that is brought into being through this very productive striving to know it, well then, from that point of view, love is a practice rather than a mere activity. And it does make sense to say that we should be obliged to undertake it. Of such a practice, however, one can never speak of completion. And we've already indicated why this should be so. Love is coextensive with our basic activity as living beings. Love is the movement towards and in response, the circular engagement that refines itself in action, that responds to limitations and disappointments, comes thus to open up new possibilities. Love is the work of walking the same path every day. Love's opportunities are infinite, and so its task is never done. For it to end is for you to end. At the beginning of this talk, I called into question whether we should think of consciousness as something that happens inside us, like metabolism, caused by, but disconnected from the wider world. I question whether that could be the right way to think about consciousness. Let me now, in passing, raise the thought that maybe that's not the right way to think about metabolism either. Metabolism, after all, and this is an idea that you can find in Karl Marx, is, as we might say, the first work. Metabolism is the very action whereby a living entity makes itself and takes up a position on, and so introduces value into the world. Thought of this way, metabolic activity is the primordial work of coming into relationship rather than merely standing in a material relation. It's the work of coming into relationship with a meaningful world. So love's work is not only our life's work, it may, in a richer biological sense, be life's work. We can fail at love, fail at consciousness, as Rose's lament and as the biblical language of commandment bind us. We can fail at consciousness, we can fail at love, but never totally. Or rather, we can fail totally, but that is death. Where there is life, there is the working towards and the bringing forth that is love happening. Thank you. Should I field my own questions? So I've been told we have time for discussion. There is a microphone. So there's a person on the left over there who can go first. I will do my best to.
Yeah, thank you so much for this beautiful and truly lovely talk. I speak here as a phenomenologist and as a phenomenologist, interested in aesthetics. And I have like two remarks. What you were so clearly and lovely describing about love as a task, work, action reminds me a lot of Hannah Arendt's idea of love of the world. And the same intersubjective pattern is woven into Arendt. So it's really more like a comment. The other thing is, I have a question. You mentioned Husserl. And I mean, sure, there is this huge egoistical implication in Husserl, but Husserl is not only like the early Husserl of the transcendental philosophical phase. The late Husserl was very much interested into the the intersubjective components in consciousness. So it's like from the very beginning, a shared consciousness, experiential thing. And I think, given this, what you were describing about love would be like a special case of an purely intersubjective, consciousness, experiential thing per se. Would you agree?
So this is a somewhat detailed question about Husserl. My knowledge of Husserl is actually confined to the later Husserl, except that you may know that Sarah Heinemann has just brought out this recent English translation of some of Husserl's work on love, and there's been a lot of writing then since that publication. So I've been thinking about how his earlier writings about love. One point which is common to the earlier work and the later work, and this is a point that even those of you who don't have particular interest in Husserl can appreciate, is this interest in the notion of the vocational and his conceptualizing the capacity that we have to, in a way, shift from one vocation to another. Right now, I'm in my modality as lecturer, teacher, professor, but I'll go home and I'll put on a different hat. I'll occupy a different set of roles. And it's a very interesting set of questions about how those inform each other. I think I actually discussed this in the Entanglement. I think Husserl's conception in the later work of a kind of reorientation that philosophical investigation can provide, what he called the epoche, I think, matches very closely the way I'm thinking of the aesthetic. But as to the more detailed question about how to address intersubjectivity, I'll leave that to the reception. We can discuss that further privately. So I've seen people in different order, but I also want you to let me know when we need to switch to an online question. But this gentleman right here next, please.
Hi, I'm Dhaval. I'm a Stanford alumni, and I happen to be a Berkeley alumni too, Haas. The question I had was with respect to, so love in one way is an emotion, and like you are equating love with consciousness. What about other very positive emotions like empathy, kindness? So could you foresee a study of also then empathy with consciousness, kindness with consciousness, etc.? Or is love unique in a certain way that you draw the parallel with consciousness?
I've said very little about, I mentioned at the very end the word taxonomy. There are so many different kinds of love. There's spiritual love, there's friendship love, there's sexual love, there's parental love, there's patriotic love, there's the love that one feels for a vocation such as surfing. And each of these is different, and it would be a mistake to treat them as if they're all the same thing. But what I'm offering is the thought that what they have in common at a very fundamental level is that each of them requires that we undertake the work of knowing the other, that we dedicate ourselves to it, and that formula, the work of undertaking the effort to bring what is there into focus, is actually then another very general way of characterizing consciousness. So that's the way I build this bridge between love and consciousness. Now, there are other nearby emotions that are very similar. Empathy is very closely tied both to perception and to concern and to care. So I think an interesting further project would be to tie love as, in this basic way I'm thinking of it, to other expressions of value and emotion. Thank you. But let me just mention that I am also trying to distance the idea that love is an emotion in sort of Aristotle's sense. I can criticize you for having an inappropriate anger. People say you can criticize a person for an inappropriate love, but the words can never reach their mark. We will love what we will love. Actually, there are so many hands up now, I'm not sure exactly what the correct order is. I'm going to try to, since we just had this person here.
Thank you so much. This was really inspiring at so many different levels. But like the animating keywords for me in your talk were like knowing, engagement, understanding, labor or work, which made me like think of love and knowing, love and labor, especially in this particular historical moment. We are in the Humanities Institute. There's a lot of attacks on this type of knowledge that you produce, that we produce here. What are the implications of your talk, like connecting love with labor and work and knowing and engagement? Because you said the opposite of love is not hate, but it's indifference. So I would love you if you could speak a little bit more about those connections here.
Well, thank you. That's a very beautiful and generous and timely question. I am trying to make an appeal here for the ineliminable importance of aesthetic consciousness, which I see as at the heart of philosophy and at the heart of love, and indeed at the heart of our perceptual engagement with the world. There may be cognitive scientists or neuroscientists in the room. I am interested in taking seriously the thought that this needs to be brought into our attempt to comprehend what the biological is. Life's work. We do not have in our science division stable or well-grounded working models of the conscious mind. Maybe it's because we work with this artificial distinction of fact and value and cognition and consciousness versus value and emotion. So I am making substantively here, my aim is to bring us into conversation, we who are artists, we who are philosophers, we are humanists, to bring ourselves into conversation with the central, with some of the central empirical and natural scientific or social scientific questions that we face. I'm not going to speak to how that bears on funding decisions. I think what's going on in the world today with relation to funding is indiscriminately destructive of all forms of learning and the kind of work we do here, but also that's going on in other divisions of the university that are not in the humanities. So I guess that's what I'd say to that. Thank you. This lady here has a question.
Thank you for the talk. My question is about being open. So you talk about love and then you see better, and you talk about engagement and you talk about work. All of that, I think, is preceded, and it is the same for loving a human or loving a piece of art, to being open to that experience, to being open to seeing. So I don't know if you have any comments on how do you come to being open to that? How do you come to being open to a piece of art or a person or nature or whatever it might be?
You know, it's interesting. Actually, it's something that the previous questioner spoke of and I didn't really pick up on in my response to her was the importance of the word work in my presentation. I'm quite interested in work as a creative mode. I mean, work is such a loaded term for so many reasons, and it suggests maybe a certain bourgeois practicality. I'm sort of interested in the idea that play is a species of work. I think that when we play at surfing, we are cultivating ourselves, we're learning, we're growing. So the first comment I'd like to make is I view myself as a big fan of the importance of the concept of work in our creative and emotional lives. I say this in response to you because openness to me smacks of attachment or easy. And what I'm always interested in is the provocations, the irritations, the challenges, the predicaments that are what push us to come into relationship, that push us to be open. Open is not the antecedent state. It is the hard-won effort, hard-won product of psychotherapy and a life well lived. Now, is a child open? I guess there is a sense in which a child is open, and I wouldn't want to deny that. So this requires further refinement. Yes, person in the back.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm a complete amateur at the phenology completely, so this might be a dumb question, but if I understand your framing right, you think of love as like metabolizing maybe a piece of food or perceiving a piece of art. So in that case, I guess work would be trying to interpret this piece of art, right? To go from this is just a still image to what is the author actually trying to say, or this is a piece of food, but like, you know, a chef obviously wants to, you know, produce flavors and a journey through their food. But what about love born through obligation? Like, I own my dog. I have to, whether he destroys my house or not, love him. Or a mother to their child, like they have, like it is an obligation. So even if you don't start out loving that thing, I think to be a good steward of it, or even for your vocation, or for literally any type of love, you have like, I guess where does obligation fit in? And can obligation be the impetus to love? Like, can you force yourself to essentially look at an image and love it? Or like, maybe sometimes that's impossible. Like maybe that's just a line on a piece of paper and I'm trying to make a meaning out of it that doesn't exist. I don't know if that made any sense, but yeah.
No, there, I mean, you said a lot, but there was an important question right there in the heart of it, which is, do we have obligations to love? For example, does a parent have an obligation to love their child, or do you have an obligation to love your dog? I just want us to sit with that question. It's a really interesting question. If you take my framework seriously, one can extend it to, do I have an obligation to take an interest in this person in front of me? Do I have an obligation to pay attention to the situation I'm in? Do I have an obligation? Is it better for me to see than not to see? Should I see? And I think that there isn't an easy answer to those questions. The idea that I'm offering in the talk is that instead of thinking of there being reasons or obligations to love, and this actually goes to the previous question as well, I'm interested in the fact that love is the work of coping with the situation you're in, the person or the dog or the child that you're with. It is possible to have a child and not love that child. It's certainly possible to have a child and not care for the child or not care for a dog. Many people mistreat their children and their dogs. We also sometimes say we love them, but still mistreat them. That's the predicament of love. And that's also the aesthetic predicament. Let me actually take a moment to, you might have wondered why I have this kind of this last slide. You probably have not noticed, if you're normal human cognitive agents, that this is actually an animation that's been changing the whole time. I'm going to now go back to the way it looked at the beginning. It's working. Yes, it should be working. Some of you will notice that gradually the car is changing from blue to red. So this is a little demonstration made by the French-American psychologist Kevin O'Regan, who I did some work with on this topic. It's an example of the phenomenon known as change blindness. In this case, it's blindness to slow changes. Often changes in our environment, typically changes in our environment, are accompanied by attention-grabbing flickers. If this is a slow change, nothing grabs your attention. So why the hell don't you see it? Some of you probably saw it, but most of you didn't. Why don't you see it? Well, this is a picture. This is not the visual field. But what's interesting is that I think one of the reasons why you didn't see it is in the context you weren't motivated to care about it. It didn't matter in some important sense. Whatever the gist of that image. Have these slides been here all along?
Yes.
That was why my thing wasn't working. I had to use a point and click. It was not in the projection mode. It was in.
Don't worry.
So I'm interested. This is a very important example for me. It has changed color, correct? Yeah.
Purple to red.
This is a very important example because it was actually thinking about these issues. It started to make me think that we don't just have, and this is something Merleau-Ponty already knew, but that we don't just already have in our minds a sort of isomorphic model of the world around us. It's not just about representing. It's not just about mirroring or reflecting. We need to do something to bring the world into presence. And the special offering of this talk is that we need to do the very same kind of work that we do when we engage in artwork or engage in a loving relationship with an activity or with an object. Okay, more hands. Yes, sir.
Thanks so much for this. I'll just comment briefly that I wasn't paying attention to the changing color of the car in part because I am focused upon the person standing in front of the car and the gesture and the identity of this person and whether this person is was a love object of yours, right? So like you, I prioritize sort of the human object, right? Recipient of my love energies, but also my visual attention. So my first prompt for you is I would love to know about this person standing alongside the car who is infinitely more interesting than the changing color of the car. And in addition to that, though, my original question is, I wonder, is love disqualified? Is it not love at all if its object is fantasy? Like, what if the beloved object doesn't have a quote unquote independent reality, doesn't, in your terms, isn't a, in your terms, really existing other, won't take on a material presence, right? If my love is directed at an illusion, a delusion, an unknowable entity, something that is eternally elusive and thus unavailable to presence, is it not love at all?
This slide was created by a French-American psychologist named O'Regan. And I think it was his relationship that is the backstory there. And I can't offer any details on that. But as to your real question, I do not want to say that. I want to say that we never occupy the standpoint from which we can clearly draw a sharp line between what is fantasy and what is real. We're negotiating. We care about that difference. That's the notion of that difference is clearly a different thing. But it's something that I think informs and activates the work of perception or the work of love. Is this projection? Is this me, something I'm adding to the situation? Or am I being responsive? Am I trapped within my own point of view, or am I sufficiently open to the other? That's the problem of being in a relationship. And so far from my wishing to say dogmatically that one can say that when one is confabulating, one isn't really loving, I want to say that the question of whether you are projecting or confabulating or fantasizing is one of love's questions for itself, to be answered by itself.
I just
Please, yes.
What if I have accepted at the onset of the love that this love object is utterly unknowable? What if my work doesn't involve the sort of task of trying to know? Is it possible to embark on a love that doesn't pursue knowing in the first instance, in the first place?
No.
So the pursuit of knowing has to be, it is sort of categorically, ontologically baked into your conception of love. Yeah. Thank you.
Love is a dedication to the work of coming to know the other.
Unknowable means unlovable.
Right, right. Well, I'm not sure whether unknowable is a term that we can precisely define in this context.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Alva, can I ask a remote question?
Yes, please. Sorry,
Uh,
there's lots of hands.
Could you speak to the difference and connection between your account of love and a concept like you alluded to this in your last answer, care? For instance, in Heidegger. Is love for you more fundamentally aesthetic or existential or both?
This is a very hard question. And honestly, I think I'm permitted at my stage of life to be honest. I'm not entirely sure what I think about this. Sometimes I want to say that love is the more basic phenomenon. That love, this motivation to know, that is the work that makes it possible for there to be a world at all, such that one might have concerns for it or cares about it. But I recognize, and this is actually something that Gabrielle Jackson and I were recently discussing, I recognize that there are ways and there are modes of consciousness that are more impersonal and that don't seem to be my accomplishment, but that are given already. And this might be what Heidegger has in mind. And that the givenness of those, of the world in that way, can only be understood in terms of modes of concern or orientation. That is all that I can say about that question.
Let's take two more before we adjourn to the reception.
Okay, so there are many hands up, but I promise you, I already pre-promised somebody a question. So, but I promise you that if you really would like to discuss, I will continue also at our reception to follow. If you have time to come to the reception, I will make time for you. You, and then it's going to be you. Okay, so you next.
Professor, thank you very much. It was a beautiful talk. Like the young man who said he might not know what he's talking about.
But he did. I remind you. He did.
He did. I'm not a philosopher, and I'll delve in that. I'm not a linguist, and I'll delve in that. And I'm not a theologian. So I'm definitely going to get myself in trouble here. I want to talk about the concept of poiesis. It's a Greek word, which can sometimes mean a creator, but it's where the word poet comes from, poietis, a poet, and sometimes a worker. But if you go to Genesis and the Greek version, that's what God is doing. He's working and he's creating in the beginning. And also, you used the love God above all things, the imperative, and love your neighbor as yourself. But to go to this gentleman who said, what if I can't know it? God tells us, you can't know me. And so I'm just going to tell you what you might be able to know. I'm love. So the imperative is to love above all things. And then again, with all due respect, there was a mistranslation in English. You said love your neighbor as yourself. A neighbor is kind of distant. That's not what it is in Greek. It's agapaton plision. Love that thing or person nearest you, loving you. you're loving us. You're nearest us right now. We might not be your neighbors, but if you think about the concepts you were talking about through that concept of species, creation and work, it might solve a lot, especially historically, ontologically, and theologically, which you said you wouldn't touch on, but you might in your later work. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. I welcome that comment, and I'll just make one kind of glancingly related response in reply. The remarks I was making about metabolism at the end, I was implicitly referring to the work of Francisco Varela and Evan Thompson on autopoiesis, which is the idea that life is like self-making. Life is self-making, and so that's just to say that I take myself to be working with exactly the same concept. And also, I think the notion of work is important. I'm very interested in this idea that God's unknowability is related to the previous question, but I don't want to stand up here in public and broadcast to thousands of people on the internet and make any statements about that. So we can talk about we can talk about that afterwards. But this person here behind
Some
the column,
conversations better a little bit in private, but so I'm an alumna and I haven't been in this kind of setting for 20 years. I came back from an advisory board meeting, so this has been such a gift. I just want to thank you. And there's something about philosophy. So I studied anthropology, history, political economy. I am not a philosopher. All of you who have stood before you are philosophers. I am not a philosopher. So forgive me for how pedestrian this question is. But I was so struck in your framework by the role of consciousness and it as a predicator for love. And I think about in our times, the capacity and the conditions for consciousness as attention, focus, and presence. I work a lot with young people and I exercise myself a lot thinking about what kind of conditions and containers can you create for them in which they can be self-loving and loving towards others. And you've left me with all types of synapsing because in this time of distraction, if presence is necessary for the labor, to love other and to love other in self, which I think we can all agree we require so much. I would argue the conditions for that are extremely low. And perhaps the capacity for that is diminishing in some ways. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic, I don't know. But I would just love in some ways to, the way in which philosophy applies to the problematics of the moment. I just wanted to pull you a little bit into that. And understanding what the constant distraction and lack of attention of our young minds mean for their capacities to love and to hold consciousness.
that's an important question, and I thank you for asking it. I think that there's a way in which actually goes back to the question that came from online about Heidegger, but it comes back to, in a way, my core idea, the phenomenon that really grips me and motivates me, is that presence is hard. It is not guaranteed. I kept using this language. You don't get it for the price of admission. I spoke of love as a practice, as something that means that we can cultivate it. When I reject the peaches and cream conception, what I'm asking us to take seriously is a horrifying thought, namely that it is possible to live without love. It is possible to live without presence. It is possible to, but I'm an optimist to this extent. It is not possible to live without these things being problems for you. And so what we need to do, I can say as a father and as a teacher, is persuade those we love to show up. If they don't show up, nothing happens for them and for all of us. So I think this question, which, I mentioned John Dewey. John Dewey thought very profoundly about art. He thought very profoundly about experience, but he also thought very profoundly about education. And a previous question asked us what to do at a time when the kind of work that humanists do is being disvalued by funding sources and by a larger political culture. I do think that there is a way in which this problem that I'm working on here is about education. Philosophy is love of knowing. It is the work of, it is about the work of showing up. How you translate that into a classroom, I'm not an expert on. And I have one of my children is in the room, and he always gets annoyed at me for making reference to him or to other children. But I grapple with this issue, particularly in relation to the new technologies. He's a grown up and he's brilliant, so I don't have to worry about him. But I have younger ones, and I worry about the role that technology, the formative role it will play in their lives, and how to control that. I do think. Sorry, I'm going on too long, but let me just say one last thing. I do think that the risks posed by the new AI technologies are truly existential, not just because of the scale at which they can operate and the things that they can do, but because we are increasingly starting to see ourselves in the mirror of them. We think that it is a way of showing up, to pull out the camera, to pull out the phone, that's a way of being in the room. That's a way of being with another. You know, we do start to think that the way to write an essay is to figure out the best way to get ChatGPT to write it for you. That's the new skillfulness. There's, you know, and that's real. The evidence suggests that most of our students are using that most of the time. So if you believe, as I do, that coping with a blank page or coping with words that you're trying to read and that you can't really read them. I have a colleague in the room who says that her students, you know, they can't bring themselves to read Hobbes. They just ask ChatGPT to explain the writing on the page. I think that those will harm us. Exactly how that plays out. I also think that human beings are resilient and we find a way, and the world is not going to end. We're anxious about it, but I thank you for your question, because you helped me build a bridge between some of the more, if you like, erudite aspects of my theorizing to a more contemporary concern that all of us face. Thank you.